Good afternoon, fellow colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. My topic is looking at China in West Africa's regional development and security plans. And let me outline what I have in mind so that whenever I run in time and you signal, I can stop. China is both a developed and a developing country. And this makes its engagement with Africa very complicated as we try to figure it out because of its dual status. That we spent quite a bit of time yesterday talking about great power relations and China's role as a great power is a reflection of how far and how fast China has developed in the past decade. Great power status is not just about wealth or cash or reserves. Kevin Rudd made an important contribution yesterday about how it requires a new ideational framework and with that a new political framework. My contribution speaks to this ideational framework as I look at West Africa's relations with China and how we can think through this in the coming decade or 2 decades from now in ways that will be win-win for both West Africa and China. So that is what I'm going to be exploring. Let me talk about 2 important trajectories in the world in the last 10 years or past decade. China has become a major force in Africa. That is very clear. It's risen to the number 2 largest economy in the world. The value of China's trade with Africa in 2011 stood at $198.4 billion. In 2009, China surpassed the World Bank as Africa's leading partner or Africa's leading lender. This is a fact. Okay. In the past decade, several African countries have been among the fastest growing countries in the world. Indeed, in the past decade, 6 of the 10 fastest growing countries have been in Africa: Angola, Mozambique, Rwanda, Ethiopia, Chad, and Nigeria. In the past 10 years, Africa has grown faster than Asia in 8 of the 10 years. So these are 2 very important economic developments. Let's see how they align. Economists concede that China's progress is permanent. We used to worry about it being an export-led growth and what would happen if its exports slowed down. But there are 2 important realities. One is China's huge middle class and how that constitutes a viable internal market. The second is the growing importance of South-South trade and how this can be a driver of growth. When it comes to Africa, economists are divided whether Africa is in the midst of a commodity boom. High prices for oil, high prices for gold, high prices for cocoa, and we can continue. Africa has seen economic booms before, but after the boom, there's not much difference in terms of Africa's economic growth. Whether this time is different and what we're seeing in Africa has the potential for an economic takeoff, economists are debating. Some think it's just a commodity boom. Some, including the World Bank, believe that Africa's economies have changed structurally in certain key ways and Africa could be positioning itself for an economic takeoff. Okay. How should China look at Africa? And for me, this is a key question. For now, Africa is a place where China gets raw materials. It's also a place for a good return on foreign direct investment. What I am arguing here is that during periods of major global transition, post-World War II was one important period. The current era is another important period. It pays to think outside of the box or to be creative or innovative. So I look at post-World War II and how the US decides through the Marshall Plan not to weaken Germany and Japan, its previous enemies, but to rebuild them. In the process, by rebuilding war-torn economies, it created what has been called a golden age of capitalism. The US grew even faster and richer. So there's a sense in which Economic growth or development is not a zero-sum game. How can China help Africa grow fast? Using West Africa as my case study in ways that can even help China's economy grow stronger and faster. That's what I'm looking at. So I'll use ECOWAS, or the West Africa Economic Community of West African States, as my case study. And as I'm an historian, obviously, I always draw from the examples and the lessons of history. Thinking outside the box. Of the countries I mentioned in Africa are some of the fastest growing countries. Many are war-torn countries that are coming out of war. Mozambique, Angola, Rwanda, and we can multiply these examples. There is a sense in which the nature of the colonial economy makes most of Africa's economies look like they are coming out of war. If we look at someone like Albert Sarraut, who was colonial minister for France, and he has one of the best definitions of what a colonial economy is. And it makes it very clear why Africa's infrastructure is weak, why Africa's economies are often monocrop economies, why Africa had no manufacturing, why Africa's economies are extroverted and they don't even trade with neighboring economies. That was the nature of the colonial economy. So there's a sense in which when it comes to Africa, it's almost like building from scratch. And therein you can see that either as a weakness or as a wonderful economic opportunity. And I'm encouraging China to see it as a wonderful economic opportunity. Okay. When it comes to colonial infrastructure, there's a sense in which as early as the 1920s, even Africa's railway lines had already been laid. Because for the colonial powers, the importance was the extraction of minerals. So very early in the colonial period, once railway lines were built to connect mines with ports, essentially there was no need to innovate any longer. Some of the important post-independent railway developments like the Tanzam or the Tazara Railway was built by China, was not built by any former colonial power. Okay. When we look at Africa, there are limitations, major limitations in infrastructure, from railways to roads. When I look at West Africa, it's only Nigeria that has more paved roads than unpaved roads. Only Nigeria. Every other country has very uneven distribution of road networks. When we talk about electricity, for example, only 24% of sub-Saharan Africa has access to electricity. And even in these 24% of the population, rolling blackouts or power cuts are such a frequent feature. It makes production difficult, it makes the cost of production, it makes attractiveness to investors, it makes all this difficult. So for me, Africa's major impediment to development is about infrastructure. And Horace pointed this out very well also in his presentation. This is a brief map showing you the railway map of Africa. You see all these short lines around the coast is to connect ports to essentially minerals and other places of exports. So you look at the entire center of Africa, there's very little connectivity. It's not between country and country, it's not regional. These are the areas I'm seeing massive opportunities for investment. This is electricity. The places, the pink lines are the ones with electricity. So if you look at the center of West Africa, for example, across Mauritania, Mali, just a tiny peak in Niger, Chad, essentially talking about whole countries with very little access to electricity. So this is where thinking outside the box is important. And I am encouraging thinking outside the box at two levels. One, in terms of China. For China to think beyond trade, to think in terms of infrastructural development, to think in terms of expanding the capacity for West African countries and broadly for African countries, both in terms of manufacturing and in terms of industry. That not only will West Africa's markets grow and we will buy more from China, we will buy not just consumer goods, we will buy capital, machinery and other things as the level of development increases. This is a win-win situation. This is what the US did with its Marshall Plan. And in a sense, what I'm calling is for China to think of its Marshall Plan as it looks in a decade or two ahead. And China has many areas of expertise that we would like to tap into. from hydroelectric generation. They just build dams, including in my country, Ghana, the Bui Dam, in solar energy, railway construction, road construction. So in these important infrastructural areas, there is a need. And we find very attractive China's resource-backed loans for infrastructure. So there's ways in which we can work together in very innovative ways. So here I look at ECOWAS. ECOWAS is important because it represents the opportunity for West Africa to diversify its economies. When you look at West Africa's trade with, let's say, the West or with Asia, we only export primary materials. It's either agricultural products or minerals. When you look at trade within West Africa, you see manufactured items, you see all, so the diversity in trade is within West Africa. The last financial or economic recession also pointed out that countries that did not trade within Africa were the most hardest hit because of their focus on trade with either the West or with Asia. What I am advocating is not either trade with the West or Asia or trade within Africa. I'm advocating both. That we combine regional trade within Africa with trade with Asia and with the West. So here I look at how ECOWAS has struggled to develop its regional market because the French countries who use the CFA franc are more committed to France. So even within ECOWAS, there's a Francophone-Anglophone divide. And I look at other challenges. So within West Africa, trade is at most between 10 and 15%. West Africa trades more with the EU, trades more now with China than it does within. And I'm trying to see how we diversify this. So all this is on ECOWAS, and I will skip all that, but you have the paper so you can read about it. There is something that is very important. I talk about the three faces of China in work that I have done. And this arises out of the fact that China is both a developed and a developing country. So when China engages Africa, it engages Africa at three levels. The level of the state, through state-owned enterprises like Sino-Hydro or CNOOC that goes into oil and exploration. At the level of multinational corporations like Huawei Technologies, etc., etc., etc. And the third phase of China is all these ordinary immigrants that have flowed into Africa, who have gone into buying and selling in downtown Accra, who have gone into illegal mining in Ghana, which led to this recent clash and the deportations of Chinese from Ghana because of their involvement in mining. One of the challenges is how to regulate this third phase of China. For me, ordinary Chinese immigrants are not problems. They are potential resources, depending on how African governments look at them and how the Chinese government looks at them. Because of the focus on government to government or state to state relations, ordinary Chinese are under the radar for both African governments and for the Chinese government. And that is why when they became involved, for example, in small-scale mining in Ghana, no one really knew how to deal with them. And this was a case where essentially media outcry about environmental devastation is what led to the crackdown on the Chinese. So this is an example of a mine. This is actually a Chinese mine in Ashanti region, in a place called Amansia West. Unfortunately, because they were stopped and deported prematurely, the Chinese miners did not have the opportunity to close back many of the places they dug to explore gold. This is a river. This is the Xini River. And it gives you a sense about how river bodies changed and how media coverage and scenes like this could kind of whip up public fury. That led to the task force, that led to the crackdown, that led to the Chinese deportation. The point I'm trying to make is this. We need China to be almost like enlightened in its strategic engagement with Africa. China needs to self-monitor. China needs to regulate itself. It is very easy because China is big and rich in its often preferred relations with bilateral African companies to roll over them, because many of these African countries even lack the technical capacity to monitor China's projects. So this is an instance where China should think in very enlightened ways to grow Africa's economies, because it sees Africa's investment back in China as a potential for China to continue to grow. Okay. So let me talk briefly about the Marshall Plan, which I believe you all know about, and how the Marshall Plan gave birth to what has been called the golden age of capitalism. There's a sense in which U.S. went from being an isolationist country to coming out and deciding that, you know what, we're going to step out and assume our leading role in the world after World War II. Yes, most of Europe was devastated. Europe needed to rebuild its economy. By giving Europe loans to rebuild its economy, the U.S. got richer than it could even have imagined. Not only that, the U.S. gained moral capital by helping Europe develop, by helping Japan develop, that it is only very recently, especially in its policies in places like Iraq and in Afghanistan, that has led to a U.S. loss in moral capital around the world. I'm encouraging China, as an aspiring great power, to think in terms of new ideational frameworks that will build other continents and regional blocks in ways that reinforces China's growth. That gives China not only wealth, but moral capital, because both are important to great world status. Thank you.